You know, generally speaking, a grown adult being this upset about the season finale of a children's show that aired 5 years ago is a sign of emotional immaturity, unhealthy obsession, and a general lack of self-awareness. On March 1st, 2020, Doctor Who aired Series 12, Episode 10, The Timeless Children, and I'm still mad about it. This one singular episode of my all-time favorite show has been eating away at my brain for 5 years now, and if I don't get this off my chest, it's gonna be at least another 5 years before I'm able to let this go. If you've spent any time in the Doctor Who community, or even if you just know someone that likes the show, you've probably heard something about this episode, and how it's the single worst thing to have ever come from British television, or how it ruined my childhood, or even something especially violent about the showrunner at the time, Chris Chibnall. This is not going to be one of those kinds of videos. That's not what's got me so upset. I'm aware that a decent chunk of the people watching this video don't know too much about Doctor Who, so just for context, Doctor Who is a British sci-fi television show about an alien time traveler called the Doctor, battling the forces of evil across all of time and space. The show's been around for over 60 years now, and the way it's managed to survive this long is because of how change is baked into the very nature of the story. Whenever the supporting cast wants to leave, those characters can just be written out of the show and replaced by new people for the Doctor to travel with. The Doctor themselves is an alien called a Time Lord, whose species has the ability to regenerate when they're close to death, purging them of whatever's killing them, but completely rewriting their DNA in the process. This lets them recast the show's main character anytime the lead actor wants to leave. This mentality even applies to the person in charge of the show too. Anytime the showrunner decides to call it quits, it's easy enough to find a replacement that can bring their own vision for what the show is supposed to be to the table, which has led to some unique and compelling takes on Doctor Who from people like Russell T. Davies, Stephen Moffat, and, of course, Chris Chibnall. Chibnall's tenure as showrunner started with Series 11, which was not great. Not offensively terrible, but struggled to flesh out its new characters, sometimes mischaracterized the existing ones, told less than engaging stories, and seemed generally hesitant to actually say anything or make any sort of proper statement deeper than, no, don't kill your enemies, just lock them away somewhere and force them to spend the rest of their lives trapped, alone, and suffering. This is a real moral that they used on multiple occasions in one season. Series 12 started out with a much stronger start. Spyfall Part 1 is a pretty exciting spy thriller with plenty of fun alien action, some great espionage, and what's this? One of the Doctor's oldest frenemies, a fellow Time Lord named the Master, is back, and he's promising something about how everything you think you know is a lie? Well, this could be good. It was not good. Spyfall Part 2 continues with the lack of characterization, has a pretty messy plot, there's some casual racism in there for good measure, but it does end with a pretty big reveal. Off-screen, the Master had discovered a Time Lord secret so awful that he felt he had no choice but to destroy his entire home planet Gallifrey. Again, this is the second time Gallifrey's been destroyed off-screen. The rest of the season is basically more of Series 11, the fam going on other adventures, Jack Harkness pops up, there's another Doctor that may or may not actually be the Doctor, the Cybermen are somewhere in there, until we get to Episode 9, which ends with the Doctor discovering a portal directly to Gallifrey. The Master pops up and tells us to be afraid because everything is about to change, and then, finally, we get to the Timeless Children. The Master traps the Doctor inside the Matrix, not that one except basically that one, and uses it to expose the secret of the Timeless Child. In the time before Time Lords, a Gallifreyan explorer by the name of Tech Tayun went into the stars and discovered a lonely child, which she brought back to Gallifrey. Eventually, she learned that the child could regenerate, so she experimented on them and extracted their regeneration energy, giving it to her fellow Gallifreyans, and creating the Time Lord civilization as we know it. Then, back in the real world, the Master stuffs a bunch of Time Lord corpses in Cybermen suits, creating Cybermasters that function as normal Cybermen but with the ability to regenerate. The Doctor tries to use a bomb to destroy them, this old guy named Koshamas sacrifices himself to let the Doctor escape, and then the Doctor is put in prison for Grand Theft Artist and resisting arrest, I think. So the episode is bad. Thousands of people have already said as much. It has a lot of the same issues with characterization as the rest of the Chibnall era. It contradicts a lot of established continuity, the twist is predictable, and honestly the story is extremely dull with very little actually happening until the end. You don't need me to complain about how terrible this episode is, because everyone else already won't stop saying it. That's not what this video is. I'm not here because the episode is bad. Here's the thing. Doctor Who is my all-time favorite TV show. I've been watching it for well over half my life, and in that time, no other show has hooked me as much or impacted me as much as a person as Doctor Who. It means so much to me, and honestly, it will until the day I die. There's a magic to this show, a power to it that makes it unlike any other art ever put to screen, and I will always love it for that. So believe me when I tell you that there are a lot of terrible episodes of this show! You think The Timeless Children is the first bad episode of Doctor Who? You think Chibnall was the first person to write a bad episode of Doctor Who? My guy, the first bad episode of Doctor Who was the second episode of Doctor Who! It's been running for 60 years, of course there's gonna be some stinkers. I'm not making this video because the episode is bad. It hasn't been living in my head rent-free for 5 years just because it's bad. It's because, despite everything, it could have genuinely been so good. I genuinely believe that, on paper, nearly every single new idea that the Timeless Children brings to the table is absolutely brilliant, and it pains me to no end that the execution of those ideas is what causes so many problems. Like, okay, a small example. Halfway through the season, we're introduced to a new Doctor. We don't know where she came from. She's never met our Doctor before, but our Doctor doesn't remember being her either. The Time Lords show up, they try to arrest her, both Doctors escape and go their separate ways. The episode ends with a big umbrella-sized question mark about who or what the other Doctor actually is. And there's a ton of potential in this idea. First off, this is not the first time we've gotten a story about some alternate version of the Doctor we've never met before. And by and large, those episodes have tended to be bangers. Each one took the concept in a completely different direction, but they were all used to say some really interesting things about the character of the Doctor and their impact on the rest of the universe. There are so many directions you could take this a new attempt on that concept. Maybe it's a version of the Doctor from another dimension. Maybe it's a ganger. Maybe it's a new version of the Valyard or the Master parading around in disguise just to mess with her. I know fans have been begging for that one for ages. Obviously, most of the clues point towards her being from the past, but Chibnall clearly wants there to be some kind of ambiguity. While the episode mostly kinda sorta settles on she's a version of the Doctor from the past, they also introduce concepts that flat out contradict that idea, and they refuse to say definitively one way or another. It's clear that they want us thinking she might be somehow before Hartnell's Doctor, but also want to leave it open for her to be something else entirely. And while I don't necessarily love that angle, you could absolutely still make it work if you handled it carefully and did something worthwhile with the idea. So, what does the Timeless Children wind up doing with this setup? Absolutely nothing. Hell, this other Doctor doesn't even technically appear in the Timeless Children. She only ever shows up as a construct inside the Matrix, not that one, but technically that one. And they won't even tell us whether it's a figment of the Doctor's imagination, the manifestation of the Matrix itself, or the actual person somehow also trapped inside the same prison. She pops up unexpectedly, and when the Doctor asks what the hell she is, she just doesn't explain. She just says, "I don't have those answers," gives our Doctor a pep talk, and pieces out. The show straight up does not give us an answer for what all that was about, or even why she was here at all. We're left with even less of an idea of what she is, because now they seem worried to commit to the whole Doctor from the past thing in any meaningful way. It's a mystery box with nothing inside, and like, that's it. That's what you introduced this brand new Doctor for? A pep talk? She doesn't actually do anything all season. She doesn't impact the story in any meaningful way. Hell, they won't even directly confirm whether she's actually connected to the Timeless Child thing at all without contradicting themselves. But at the same time, I kinda can't help but wonder if the Ruth Doctor got Darth Jar Jar'd a bit. Like, in some ways it really does seem like this entire plot thread was supposed to mean something much bigger later down the line, and this was just the prelude. But the 1-2 punch of fans completely hating the reveal and Chibnall leaving the show just one season later meant they kinda never followed up on it. With that in mind, it's hard to fault it quite as much, and at the very least makes it a bit harder to use as criticism for the Timeless Children specifically, but the fact that they handled it in that episode the way they did is still super bizarre and frankly pretty pointless. Of course, that's hardly the only missed opportunity with this episode. If it was, we wouldn't be here. Case in point, the Cybermasters. So halfway through the episode, the Master starts a partnership with the Cybermen. He reveals that he'd kept the corpses of all the Time Lords he'd killed, then converts those bodies into what he calls Cybermasters, in most ways just regular Cybermen, but with one key difference. They can regenerate. Effectively, the Master made the Cybermen immortal. And real talk, the Cybermasters rule. Right out the gate, those designs are peak. I love how clear both the Time Lord and Cyberman aspects are defined while still working super well together. They're sleek, they're stylish, they're intimidating. Say what you will about the writer's room during this era, but the costume design team popped off. But even beyond just design, I love the idea of the Cybermasters. It feels like the perfect natural evolution of traditional Cybermen in the most terrifying way possible. Like, the whole thing with the Cybermen is that they used to be basically human, but became so obsessed with purging themselves of organic weaknesses that they eventually lost their humanity entirely, and, in purging themselves of organic weaknesses, inadvertently gave themselves the weaknesses of machines instead. They can be blown up. They can be electrocuted. Gold can short out their electronics. They're extremely powerful, but they can be stopped. But now? Now, destruction just means regeneration. It just means slowing them down for a few moments. And making the Cybermen unkillable means they're now suddenly a much more dangerous threat. In this same episode, we see a few humans plow through dozens of regular Cybermen. But if all of them could just get back up, there'd be nothing anyone could do. Now, we've seen something similar to this idea before, but last time it was more of a first grader on the playground going, no, actually, I'm electrocution proof and I'm immune to fire and lasers don't work on me. Giving them a real, proper, in-universe explanation for immortality and one that connects directly to the main plot makes it work so much better. And it goes deeper, too. In pretty much every Cyberman story we've gotten, the one bit of security we've had is that, because the Doctor is a Time Lord, their biology is technically incompatible with the conversion process. The horrors of becoming a Cyberman are never actually a risk for them. At worst, they might be killed, but that just means regeneration. But now the Cybermasters aren't just compatible with Time Lords, they require Time Lord bodies to function. The one bit of safety the Doctor had was just stripped away from her. And now, for the first time, she's just as much at risk of being converted, of having her identity stripped away, of having her flesh replaced with metal, as any of the humans she's protecting. That rules! That's such a cool way to naturally up the stakes. And of course, we've gotta talk about the potential for body horror, right? Like, that's a pretty intrinsic part of any good Cyberman story. Living beings getting stripped apart and replaced with metal is already terrifying. But what happens when those living beings have a built-in system to heal upon death? And what happens when the Cybermasters use that system? Like, do the Time Lord bodies in those suits somehow regrow inside the machine? Are their muscles and tendons forced to twist around the pistons and servos that once replaced them? In that first brief moment of their entire body being reset, do the Time Lords have a split second of self-awareness filled with the horror at what they've become before the emotional inhibitor kicks back in and reverts them to a mindless drone? This is the good stuff, man! You can get terrifying with these things. And heck, if you wanted to go further, you could even use the Cybermasters' regeneration against them. Like, in theory, regeneration brings Time Lords back to life, right? And the Master stuffed already dead Time Lord bodies in Cyberman suits and then caused them to regenerate, right? If the writers wanted it to work this way, the Doctor has a pretty clever way to stop the Cybermasters and bring the Time Lords back from the dead. What if regenerating actually forced the Time Lords out of the suits and saved them from death? Another example of the Master focusing so much on the big picture, getting so arrogant and ambitious that he completely missed the obvious. That'd be such a perfect full circle way to end things that ties up every loose end and solves both problems at once. So, given all that, given all the potential here, I'm sure this episode does something amazing with the Cybermasters, right? Nope. 2 scenes. They're in 2 scenes. They're in 2 scenes, and those scenes consist of them literally just standing around. I cannot stress this enough. They don't even do anything in those 2 scenes. The first scene is the big reveal where they walk in, one of them regenerates, and then they walk out. The second scene is at the end of the episode where they walk in, stand there, and then shoot an old man as he blows them all up. That's it? That's insane! All the things they could do with the Cybermasters, and all they have them do is standing there menacingly? It's borderline insulting. And it's baffling too, because they straight up disappear for most of the episode. After they're introduced, there are like 3 different moments where we could have seen them in action, could have seen them prove how dangerous regeneration is, but instead, those scenes either contain no threat whatsoever, or, at best, just use regular Cybermen for some reason. Where did they go? Why were they not used here? I'm just confused at this point. It's so anticlimactic. It's so stupid. You're telling me Gallifrey got genocided again just for this? Hey, wait a second. Gallifrey got genocided again? Now, like with the new Doctor concept, the destruction of the Doctor's home is something that's been tackled before. Series 1, Episode 2 ends by dropping the bombshell that Gallifrey burned at some point in between the end of the Classic Era and the start of the Revival. This was a huge deal at the time, and kickstarted an 8-year-long character arc as we learned about the events leading up to Gallifrey's destruction, the Doctor's role in it, and how he was dealing with the grief and guilt he felt as a result. It was extremely powerful, and served to help give a lot of depth and nuance to multiple incarnations of the Doctor. And honestly, the 13th Doctor kinda needed some more depth and nuance. One of the biggest criticisms of Series 11 was that this new Doctor basically felt like a checklist of surface-level character traits without any of the substance behind them. So giving her some sort of massive, character-defining event like Gallifrey's destruction, something that helps us see what she's actually like, makes a lot of sense. The problem is that they didn't make a character-defining event like Gallifrey's destruction. They just destroyed Gallifrey again. Which, that's a bit cheap, isn't it? 8 years and a ton of character development just to earn the right to bring it back, and we get one story set on the planet afterwards, and then they just remove it from the playing field again? That feels like a missed opportunity all on its own. Can you imagine how many more cool stories we could have gotten from the Time Lords? But you know what? Okay. Gallifrey's dead again. Sucks, but it is what it is. At least it's in service of a major shift in how the Doctor is written, right? Right? Nothing changes. We get a few scenes here and there where the companions imply that the Doctor is sulking, off-screen, but we don't really get to see any palpable shifts in her behavior or personality. It straight up does not change much at all. And it sucks because there are so many angles they could have approached this from. Even beyond the bare minimum of all my people are dead and I'm the last of my kind thing that you'd expect, there's so much more you could do here. Okay, this is the second time that the Doctor has been the last of the Time Lords. Does she feel any different now? Does she feel like she's just going in circles? Does she begin to wonder if maybe she's somehow cursed? Does she start to dissociate with none of it even feeling real anymore? Or does she go numb, shutting her emotions off completely to avoid feeling the return of a grief she'd once fought so hard to undo? And that brings up another good point. Gallifrey only returned in the first place because she saved it. After hundreds of years of dealing with guilt, shame, isolation, she managed to change her own history and save her people. It was, in many ways, her greatest triumph. And now it's just been undone? Retconned back out of existence, regressing back to a more tragic status quo, all for nothing? How does that make her feel? Maybe she becomes obsessed with the idea of changing the past again, and even starts to get reckless and self-destructive with it. Or maybe she gets into a downward spiral of believing everything good she does will be undone. All the times she's saved the day have been temporary fixes that'll eventually give way to something even worse. And even that can go further. The last time Gallifrey was destroyed, it was the Doctor that did it. Yeah, he chose to blow the whole planet up to stop the Time War from devastating any more galaxies. But this time, she had nothing to do with it. She was on the other end of the universe. The Master destroyed it in her stead. Does she feel some horrible sense of relief that at least it wasn't her this time? Does she become furious that someone would ever follow in her footsteps? That it was just a copycat that feels pride in what he did? Or does she still blame herself anyways, convinced that she should have been there to save them? After all, in another lifetime, he'd been the one to abandon them without leadership. Literally none of that is explored. We don't get to know how the Doctor feels beyond a general sense of moodiness. She never talks to anybody about this. It takes her ages to even tell her friends that her home was destroyed and her people were genocided. And even when she does tell them, it doesn't lead anywhere. I mean, God, the Master literally has to prompt her to ask why he did this. She walks through the ruins of her home and doesn't react at all. It forces you to ask, why even bother destroying Gallifrey in the first place? If you weren't going to use it for the sake of some big character arc, what was the point? And look, I don't want to try and put words in Chibnall's mouth, but I can't help but feel like he just saw it as a big twist. Like something to shock the audience, to build intrigue about the whole timeless child thing. Like they only did this so people would go, ooh, what's the big secret that was so bad it would make the Master destroy his own planet? And as if that wasn't already stupid enough, That big secret was a massive waste, too! The Timeless Child reveal is at the very heart of this episode. You'd sure hope so with a title like The Timeless Children. But in a lot of ways, it's also the heart of my issues here. So far, I've talked a lot about all these really cool ideas, how they could have been used to say something meaningful, or at least used to do something interesting. But instead, time and time again, Chibnall refused to take advantage of the ideas he was creating. And nowhere is that more apparent than with the story of the Timeless Child, an explorer that finds an alien child, brings them home, and uses their power to create the Time Lords. I want to try something. I'm gonna retell the Timeless Child story, reframing it a bit, and I want you to see if it reminds you of anything. So, long before Time Lords had a name, Gallifrey was simply home to a fairly advanced species. Not on the same level as what they'd become, but far enough along for rudimentary space travel. A pioneer by the name of Tecteun sets out for the stars, and on her journey, she discovers an alien child standing beneath a veil. She doesn't know who or what this child is or where they came from, and the child won't tell her anything. So, Tecteun abducts the child, bringing them back with her to Gallifrey and forcing them to assimilate to her culture. When the child dies on this alien world and their gift of regeneration is revealed, Tecteun begins experimenting on them, and in the process forces them to regenerate multiple times. As a reminder, regeneration is triggered by death. Tecteun killed a child. Eventually, Tecteun manages to steal the power of this Timeless Child and distributes it among the other Gallifreyans, who use it to further advance their own society, and eventually, once enough time has passed, they go back and erase the entire history of the child they took their greatest gift from. Then, they subtly rewrite history, dictating the way these events are portrayed within their own archives, while the child, taken from their home and robbed of their culture, is erased. Now, I don't know about you, but speaking as an American, do you know what this reminds me of? Colonialism! The Time Lords did a colonialism! An explorer went out in search of the vast beyond, discovered new life, and immediately forced it to assimilate, stole whatever traits she deemed worthy of her own superior civilization, erased this foreign culture from history, and then reframed the entire thing to make what they did look less evil. That's textbook colonialism! And in a British TV show hailing from the country notorious for that exact thing on a scale so massive that some countries are still reeling from it, a story like this has a ton of connotations they could take advantage of. In some ways, it feels tailor-made to be a criticism of the UK's past, their colonialism and subsequent changing of history. And when you look at it through that lens, it's genius! Because, the Time Lords have kind of always been an allegory for the British government, right? I won't claim to be an expert on the subject, but the criticisms are pretty blatant. The apathy, the bureaucracy, the sense of superiority, it's clearly intentional. So using them to tell this story and send this message is brilliant. The Time Lords have always been evil in a bureaucratic kind of way. They've always been super shady, and hell, we've even seen that they clearly have no problem abusing a child to save their own skins. The idea that their greatest power was stolen and that they covered the whole thing up is very in character for them. It works on multiple layers here. And look, I'm not gonna do the thing again where I list all the ways this could have been used and then drop the very obvious bombshell that they didn't do any of that. You know it's coming, but what's shocking here is just how averse the episode seems to even acknowledge this idea. When the Master shows the Doctor what happened through the Matrix, these events are depicted as a good thing. Tecteun is referred to as an explorer who rescued and saved this child, who studied them after their initial regeneration and only wished to understand them. She was someone who took the ultimate risk for science. Regeneration became the genetic inheritance of these people. It's amazing just how consistently these events are depicted as a good thing, or at best portrayed with neutrality. Hell, even the Master barely seems to care. After all his talk about making them pay for what they did, even after genociding them for it, he still treats these events as simply fine. He's the one to narrate the story. He's the one wording it that way. The most disdain he expresses is calling the Time Lords pompous for naming themselves what they did. In the end, it turns out what he's actually upset about doesn't seem to be what was done to the child, but instead that a bit of the Doctor is inside of him. Which, first of all, buddy, I guarantee you this is not the first time the Doctor's been inside the Master, but second, this whole thing suddenly makes everything worse. That's the Master's motivation? That's why he resorted to genocide? And why the hell doesn't anyone in this episode seem to care at all about what they actually did? Even the doctor, the victim in all this, mostly seems upset that her memories were stolen from her instead of any of the other actually insane stuff here. Maybe we might have actually gotten some kind of discussion about it if there were still Time Lords around to get called out and forced to face the consequences, but oh right, they were all killed off screen. The episode can't even point to the Time Lords and go, what they did is bad, because they're all already dead. In effect, they were made the victims here. This could have been used to explain how colonizers will lay claim to places that aren't theirs, force foreign cultures to assimilate, take whatever quote-unquote good parts of those cultures they want while erasing everything else, and then sanitizing the whole thing so their people don't grow a conscience or ask for justice. It's the most overt, obvious theme you could convey with this sort of twist, and they just don't. No one gets called out for what was done. Their actions are never reflected on. The doctor, the victim here, doesn't even seem to have suffered. She just gets hung up on not remembering her past. If anything, the episode seems to go out of its way to normalize this stuff. And what's so frustrating is just how close they get to actually saying something meaningful. Like, for example, one of the main criticisms of the reveal is that it kind of ruins the Doctor's character. They're supposed to be the underdog, the outcast, the rebel. They're supposed to be the one that was scorned for trying to do what's right, and every time he's ever gotten too big, let himself gain too much infamy or let it go to his head, the show makes sure to humble him and remind him what he's really fighting for. But now, with this twist, none of that works. She's actually the single most important member of the single most important and powerful species. The outcast is actually the founder. All that arrogance is justified. And the Master literally says this. He straight up admits that he resents her for believing she was special and hates that now it turns out she was right. They're right there! They're so close! He said the thing! He acknowledges it! And then it goes nowhere. It's glossed over and never brought up again. And as if to make matters worse, later in the episode she even says,
"But I am so much more than you."
Which, let me tell ya, hits different after he opens up about this. But it's not intentional. It's never treated as a bad thing, or as a character flaw. It's supposed to be a heroic moment for her. Or, like, at one point, the Doctor asks why the Time Lords would lie about this. And that's a good question. Why do colonizers try to hide the actions they seem so proud of in the moment? But it's not supposed to be an actual question. It's not supposed to be an opportunity for the show to explain that to its audience. She means it in a rhetorical sense. She means, I don't believe you, because despite knowing full well that the Time Lords lie a lot, I strangely just can't imagine why they'd lie about something like this. Or, here's my favorite one. One of the most fascinating things about this entire episode. Isn't it kind of interesting that when the Master converts the Time Lords into Cybermasters, when he strips them of their identities and their flesh, the one thing he chooses to include, the one thing he deems worthy of keeping, is the one thing they stole from someone else? That's borderline poetic justice! And it's just never touched on. Am I going mad? Even beyond a thematic standpoint, even ignoring the colossal waste of this idea and the borderline cowardice about making any sort of statement, there are still issues here. The main one, of course, is the identity of the Timeless Child themselves. We've already talked about how being the Timeless Child undermines the Doctor's character. That much has already been talked to death. But isn't it also kinda basic? Wow, big surprise, the protagonist of the show is the most important person in the universe. How game-changing. It's predictable. It's a reveal that everyone saw coming. It's a waste of a twist. Especially because, as plenty of folks will be happy to tell you, there was another, better candidate right there. It should have been the Master. That solves almost everything, doesn't it? No more continuity headaches with the Doctor's past, no more undermining her character. Suddenly, the Master's rage, his genocide of his own people, seems a lot more justified. Not right, but at least understandable. And like, wouldn't that be the most in-character twist for both the Time Lords and the Master? Because they already have a history of screwing him over. They're constantly executing him, resurrecting him, forcing him to fight their wars, driving him mad as a child as part of some harebrained scheme to save themselves from destruction. Of course they do this on top of all that. And for the Master, it could make things so much more interesting. Making the Doctor too important was a mistake, but the Master? How much would he let that arrogance of knowing just how special he is go to his head? How much would he let it justify everything he's done? He deserves to conquer the universe. After all, he's the Timeless Child, creator of the Time Lords. I don't know, man. It just feels like at every turn, Chibnall basically handed himself some of the coolest ideas in Doctor Who history on a silver platter and just tossed them out the window because he thought the platter was more interesting. What makes this episode so frustrating isn't just that it's badly written, it's that it introduces all these great ideas and then seemingly goes out of its way to do nothing with them. Every idea wasted, every theme ignored. There are so many examples of this. I didn't even have time to cover them all here. Actually, screw it, lightning round. In Fugitive of the Jadoon, a Time Lord named Gat learns about Gallifrey's destruction, and at the time I figured they'd use this to reveal that they knew the Master was coming and evacuated in time. But then like 5 seconds later she gets atomized, so that plot point got dropped before it even went somewhere. If the boundary leads to Gallifrey, then does that mean a ton of humans wound up on the planet at some point? Where did they go? What happened to them? Like, I'm sure they're all dead now because the Master killed them, but like, how was that never addressed? And before you say anything, Koshamas says that it looks different from before, as in, it looks ruined, not that it's a completely different location, so I've got no idea what's happening. On that note, doesn't the episode end with, like, 2 humans in this entire half of the universe left alive? And then those humans get stranded in the 21st century? First of all, that's bleak, even for Chibnall. Second, that can't even actually be true, because we've seen humans further forward than that. And third, what happens when they get to the past? Do they try and change history so the Cyber War never happens? How do they adjust to what's effectively ancient times for them? Why does it end with them going, whoa, we're in the past, without actually resolving anything? There's a bit where the Master says something about, you're trying to appeal to my better nature, and we both know I don't have one. But, like, we know that's not true because of Missy. So then is this before Missy? Would have been neat to maybe see him start developing towards that version of the character then, instead of going in the opposite direction. And if it's after Missy, what caused the sudden change of heart? Was it seriously just the timeless child thing? And if it was, a little acknowledgement couldn't have hurt. So apparently Koshamas was the one to send the Siberium back in time, but that's revealed like a second before he dies, so they do not have time to elaborate on that, and they basically wound up just adding another thing without anyone doing anything with it? There we go. That's it. It's over. Look, the truth is, in a lot of ways, I kind of resent this episode for just how badly they fumbled what could have easily been one of the best episodes in the entire show. We could have had it all, dude! And I don't know which option is worse, that Chibnall was just apathetic about the whole thing, that he actively tried to avoid doing anything with the ideas, or that, against all odds, he genuinely believed that what he'd written somehow had any substance at all. It's, I don't know, it's sad. If nothing else, it's a good lesson in writing. Sometimes, not doing anything at all can be worse than doing the wrong thing. Even still, there's some comfort in knowing that, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. This new era seems content to mostly ignore the worst aspects of the episode, and no matter what, Doctor Who will always be my favorite show. The episode's bad, but don't let the internet lie to you. It doesn't actually ruin anything. It's just a shame, that's all. Whew, glad to have that out of my system. Honestly, I do feel better. I think getting to say my piece legit did help me feel less mad about the Timeless Child. So that's it then. I can move on. Unless the Series 15 finale is bad, then I guess I'll see you all back here in another 5 years. Russell, please don't let that happen. I want to know peace again. See you all back here in 5 years.